Outside of all the distracting noise in the media around climate change, what are the real challenges that climate scientists are facing, looking forward into the future?
Indeed, we cannot predict the future climate. We can only do projections, because the future of the climate depends on which emission trajectories, emission values we will decide to have as a community.
Well, the trajectory we seem to be on at the moment, based on the current data on global greenhouse gas emissions, suggests that the 3.5-degree rise in temperature anticipated by the IPCC by the end of the century may be overly optimistic.
Now that we look at the Earth's history more carefully and have better data on how the Earth responded to changes in global temperature and atmospheric composition in the past, and as we see how the Earth is responding to the present amount, 387 parts per million of CO2, we see that we have actually already passed into the dangerous range of atmospheric CO2.
So what does this mean, John, for all of us on the planet, if James Hansen is right?
Well, if James Hansen's projections are right, we could be looking at temperature increases of between 4 and 6 degrees by the end of the century. One hopes that Professor Hansen's projections are a little on the high side, because if they do turn out to be correct, then the consequences would be very serious indeed for us.
The vast majority of scientists are agreed in the UNFCCC process. It's actually a consensus that is at a lower level of seeing the threat than many scientists would say. But they got consensus on that very conservative notion of how much at risk we are. Many scientists would say the tipping points are coming sooner, the risk is greater.
So what's meant by the tipping points?
In the climate system, what is meant by a tipping point is that when we reach a certain threshold of temperature, there may be changes which are almost irrecoverable, which might occur.
The climate system has many feedbacks where changes can actually have the effect of accelerating their own growth. And if one of these positive feedback events takes off, then it may actually lead to a significant regime change for the entire climate, and something that we find it very difficult to anticipate could happen.
We see a tipping point now in the Arctic, where the sea ice has, at the end of the summer, is only about half of what it was a few decades ago. And even without any additional greenhouse gases, we will probably lose that sea ice over the next few decades. What we don't want to happen is to pass tipping points where irreversible things happen, like disintegration of ice sheets, because it takes thousands of years to build an ice sheet, or extermination of species, of animal and plant species. Once they're gone, we've got a much more desolate planet.
With business as usual, if we continue as we're going, what will it be like at the end of the century?
Where, for example, in Europe, heat waves such as the one we saw in 2003, which killed 50,000 people in Europe in a few weeks, would happen 1 out of 2 summers on the average.
To be honest, I don't think about it that much. I suppose the fact that it doesn't affect me directly now probably doesn't make me think about it that much.
It'll be a long time before it happens. It's starting to change now, but I think it'll take a long time.
I'm not so sure how immediate it's all going to be, you know. I read a lot into it, but I'm not so sure how quick it's going to happen, you know.
We hear about the implications of climate change, melting ice caps and sea level rise. But until we feel those effects in our daily lives, the consequences are difficult to comprehend. So what are some scientists saying about the predictions for Ireland?
If you think about most of our major towns and cities like Cork, like Dublin, like Limerick, Galway, they're all on the coastline. They've all experienced a number of flood events over the last 10 to 12 years or so, and this problem is only going to get worse as time goes on, as the sea level carries on rising.
There's some evidence that the extreme weather events will increase in frequency in the future due to the warming climate. This is much more uncertain than the temperature and precipitation patterns, but it's something we have to be aware of.
Well, Ireland is going to be a much more hostile place in the sense that we're going to have nastier storms, we're going to have changes in temperature of a very significant nature, so droughts in summertime, maybe more flood events in wintertime, and more natural disasters in terms of weather-generated disasters. So it's definitely going to be a more hostile place, something we're not really very much used to or prepared for.
If those are some of the implications of climate change for Ireland, what about other parts of the world?
The implications are enormous, partly because also there's going to be the population increase. So between now and 2050, we're expecting at least 2.6 billion more people, going up close to 9 billion. The prediction is that by 2050 we could have 250 million climate refugees, and they will move to Europe, and I don't know how we would possibly stop them.
Morning, how are you?
How are you, Mr. Bennett?
This is the top most important priority issue, not only for the United Nations, but for whole international community and even for humanity.
They're saying that it's going to happen, so if it happens, it happens. Like, there's nothing really we can do about it, is there?
Like a lot of things, unfortunately, today there's more lip service than action. And it's such a pity because it could be too late.
Even if you didn't believe it was necessarily happening, the risks are so catastrophic that it's really not something we can afford to take a chance on.
It's been described as an opportunity the world cannot afford to miss. Delegates from 192 countries are in Copenhagen hoping to hammer out a landmark agreement on climate change.
Talks will be tense with deadlock on agreement between poorer and richer nations. The White House says US President Barack Obama will attend and is still confident a deal can be done.
Now, indeed, Copenhagen didn't solve all problems, but still, they agreed to put a number in terms of objective, of target, 2 degrees. The IPCC in its last report says very clearly that to stay in the vicinity of 2 degrees, and before the end of the century, global emissions would actually need to be reduced to 0.
Jean-Pascal explained that the need for action on cutting emissions is even more urgent if we consider the growing population and energy needs of the developing world.
The poorest countries must be able to develop, which means they must be able to have the transfer of green technologies rapidly, because they're going to develop anyway. And if China continues on its carbon path at the moment, and India does, and other countries that are emerging do, then we will have no safe world by 2050. We will have a world where it will be catastrophic, the problems.